And I know the next up, we have practitioners, and I'll introduce them in a minute. We'll be talking about real world FinOps policy and governance at scale. Real world is not a marketing term, but the idea is these folks have done it at big organizations, various organizations through various tools, and they're interactive with a lot of people in their teams that are doing it as well. It's an emerging space; everybody's learning, but it would be great to learn how can you really scale FinOps policy and governance programs at various organizations. Just a heads up, we will be talking about gardening a lot as well. So if you like gardening, this might be the right session and the right group of folks for you as well. So let's take a minute for folks to introduce themselves. We'll start with you, Bindu.
Hello, all. Thanks, Umer, for inviting me in this panel. Happy Wednesday, everyone. I am Bindu Sharma. As it says, I manage the FinOps practice at Teradata. And one fun fact, Umer, you were right. During COVID, I developed a hobby of, I created the Zen garden. So developed that hobby to extend it. And, so I'm very much into now gardening, but in a Zen way. So that's from my side.
Great. Mandy?
Hello, I'm Mandy. I'm an engineer of cloud automation at Verint, and I have implemented Cloud Custodian. I also have a green thumb and enjoy gardening and houseplants.
Great. Kapil?
Hi, Kapil Pungavelu, CTO and co-founder of Stacklet and creator, lead maintainer on Cloud Custodian. I don't know if I have a green thumb, but I do like to plant. I start them in an aero garden and I transplant them to soil, put them on the windowsill. And then recently I've taken up stand-up paddleboarding, which has been a lot of fun.
Great. And it's funny, right? I've heard, folks explain policy and governance the same way too for gardeners or people who, it's like weeds. Like if you don't have policy and governance in place, the weeds keep coming back, right? And all of us who have to deal with backyards and gardens as well, wish there was something like policy for gardens, so you don't have to do weed cleaning every year. But unfortunately, at least I don't know anything like that as well. If anybody else is interested in gardening, please put that in the chat window as well. Just would be nice to know. With that, we'll start with the questions. We'll start with you, Bindu. Why is governance so foundational to sustainable FinOps?
Governance, it makes the FinOps sustainable in itself. It is foundational because it creates the structure, the accountability, the visibility, which is needed to manage the cloud cost, even at scale, and at the same time, making sure we are not sacrificing the innovation. It ensures that each team is accountable for their own usage, for their own budget, and the optimization, and which is we know is a very core principle of FinOps. The governance done right way, it set the standards for tagging, for resource provisioning, for scaling, for reporting. But at the same time, we need to make sure that to make the governance sustainable, we need to keep a balance. So that engineers, the developers, the product managers can innovate freely, but within the guardrails. And governance provide that flexibility of the policies and the automated controls. It ensures that we have reliable and real-time cost data available at to the right stakeholders at the right time. And we heard in the previous talk how time is so critical. It aligns all of our cost optimization goals with the business goals, with the contract commitments, we did see that now FinOps has extended, the practitioner have extended their role beyond sustainability to now SaaS governance also. We do participate in SaaS contracts and such. So there also we can provide all the importance of governance guardrails when we are thinking about the contract commitments. So what I say is governance is the operating system of FinOps. Without it, any efforts to reduce waste or to align spend will fall apart very quickly.
No, that's great. Absolutely, governance is definitely, for lasting results. Mandy, would you like to add something?
Yeah, in addition to that, policy and governance can make engineers work more efficiently, even if they don't know much about cost. So, like we were saying earlier with team time savings and mean time to savings. Yeah, like if the IaC is in place and the resources are being deployed properly the first time, then you'll save a lot of money by one, not having them misdeployed and spending a bunch of money, and two, not having engineers have to go back and redo it the right way. So that's a big sustainable FinOps point. And then also it's proactive cost savings. So we already went over the weeding in the spring analogy. So until people are educated and making cost choices on their own, it's very helpful for everyone to have governance in place so that they can't make poor financial decisions.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Kapil?
So I guess I regard governance as like this big tent of all the things you need to do to be well managed in the cloud. And it's inclusive of like security, compliance, good operations, and cost is also a key focus. But the underlying theme around governance to me is about automating like manual goal enforcement. That leads to team savings. It's about driving the education and the behavior change within the organizations, but all that's towards that common goal of helping an organization be well managed. Specific to FinOps, like, we've got a couple different practices here. Like, if we look at, what FinOps spent without like some of the governance automation, like you end up with the, as we've sort of now made the analogy on spring cleaning, like where, there's this hey, we're wasting all this money, let's go fix things. And then a month later, all the weeds are back. And so it's about how do we create the automation and the policy education towards having that be continuously optimized. And so that's about mean time to savings. It's about having automated policies in both your runtime and your infrastructure as code to help you prevent the waste from coming in the first place, and avoiding having to do spring cleanings in the future by just having the continuous enforcement instead of waste accumulation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So Kapil, we'll continue with you. Can you give us a real world policy challenge that you saved and how you overcame it at a previous role, and plus any of the best practices you would like to share?
So I guess the biggest challenge is learning that while automation, it's critical to have automation, but before you can get to automation, you have to do a bunch of stuff. You have to like get sort of organizational buy-in that this is a way to do things. You have to get and if you're in a federated org or a larger enterprise, like getting getting your leadership and getting line of businesses to sort of line up to, hey, we recognize this is a problem and we want to try to fix things. So being able to start communicating out before you even start implementing, remediation policies, you might start with like, hey, let's do reporting, and then sort of like communicating out on a consistent basis what those things are going to be that are going to be rolled out, and then being able to create clear processes around exceptions and rollouts that you're preventing surprises. Like the first rule around dealing with remediation and automation is do no harm. So making sure that you've created the processes so that no one's surprised, and even when they are surprised, that they have a chance to respond before any disruptive activities take place in the environment.
Great. And Mandy, can you share a real world FinOps challenge as well in terms of governance?
Sure. Yeah. So management was on board in our case when we first implemented Cloud Custodian. So I guess the main challenge that we found was communicating with other teams throughout the company, explaining that their unused resources were going to be cleaned if they don't tag them or if they don't clean them. So that's like Kapil was saying with dry run policies. So giving them a preview of here's a list of what is going to be cleaned or terminated, and then getting responses back from that. It's also just a culture change where oftentimes the culture is just get it done, get it working, and then just leave it because it's working, and don't try to make it better necessarily because there's more things to do. But having a culture of how can we do this in the most cost efficient way and the best way. So just getting cost into the engineers' minds is another challenge, but policy automation helps with that a lot, like I said earlier.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I know you briefly mentioned shift left FinOps. What does an effective shift left FinOps strategy look like, Bindu?
The effective, I would think, where it integrates the cost awareness early into the software development life cycle, and Mandy did allude to that, so that developers, architect, or product team have cost in their mindset when they are coming up any new feature or function or capability development, and not being reactive, like not finding any optimization opportunities that they would have thought in during the architecture cycle, right? So making the cost as one gating item during the architecture approval, during design review, I would say would be a good strategy. And then getting into the actionable in terms of let's take the example of monitoring, defining their log retention, the duration, and the storage classes in that regard, that okay, the debug log should be retained only for 3 days, not every kind of like debug or info or error logs should have the same retention policy, right? Define different retention policy based on the use case, and then have that as one policy construct. The other, I think, we all know with the new AI coming up, with the new focus around AI, the GPU selection is critical. So make sure that we have a workflow, again, the approval workflow, where the size of the GPU needed for a case, for that use case, is justified. And again, bringing in that all shifting that all to the left, bringing it into the approval cycle of it. The other one, I would say another effective shift left policy is around the volume sizing, and also the life cycle management of those volume. Set up the auto delete for any volumes. First of all, the policy around governance around that they should all be tagged, otherwise they will be auto deleted. And then defining the storage class, like do you need standard, then there is a use case for standard, but if you need IOPS, provide the justification. So I feel these strategies involve it set the mindset, the culture, from cost awareness and optimization decision earlier in the development life cycle, and how it makes the FinOps practice more effective, so that we are not finding this waste after the effect.
Great. And Kapil, any thoughts on shift left?
Sure. Definitely got a few, like, just to build on what Biddu said, like, if we look at waste as a bug, let's say, all problems are easier, faster to fix, closer to the developer, and shift left is about, trying to make these problems go away before they're even present in the environment. So mean time to savings is effectively zero. And it's also by bringing that cost awareness to developers. But there's a number. I also wanted to talk a little bit about some of the challenges with shift left as well. Like, what does it mean to implement shift left? So, you've got some notion of being able to give potentially some priceless information to developers, but it's important when we thinking about it from a FinOps perspective that we also understand there are limitations there in the sense that say we provision a serverless function, the list price of that is zero, let's say, but in practice, we have to look at the runtime metrics to understand what the true costs of that are. Same with like if we provision a, big database, is that over provisioned? Well, we don't know without runtime metrics, which is sort of post deployment evaluation. So if we look at what we can do with shift left, we look at a lot of what are sort of attribute configurations, making sure we've got, the right IO types, we've got the right instance sizes that are appropriate for our environment, making sure we've got lifecycle attached, log retention, storage policies. So we can do a lot of sort of attribute-based configuration checks there. And it's also important to look at how do we implement these. So making sure that you're able to get into the CI pipelines for the application teams, potentially leveraging or piggybacking on top of some of what your security teams are already doing in terms of static analysis. So having that ability to interject into pipelines more widely is sort of a key factor towards being able to get wide adoption within an organization across many app teams. So those tend to be some of the challenges there. And then, in terms of like making sure that you're creating the right feedback loops, you want to make sure you're, annotating the pull request, giving direct feedback into those pull requests as far as what things there are, instead of having people dig through CI logs. And then, of course, if you want to do the ultimate shift left, you want to try to be very much in the developer ID, like, as they're typing, giving them sort of that feedback loop to what, where things are wrong. But of course, the number of IDEs and developers is IDEs and editors for developers is very much a myriad concern. So, looking at some of the opportunity and some of the challenges and also some of the limitations. I would say that sort of covers through it on sort of my perspective on what shift left can do. And it's definitely, something we want to adopt so that we can help reduce that mean time to savings and increase and prevent any waste within the environment. But we also have to balance that against some of the issues with it, which is it doesn't always catch all the things. We get advanced applications like Kubernetes that are provisioning things automatically in the background, or if someone's doing something in console ops, heaven forbid. And so we just have to be able to be aware of those things that are happening outside of the control of our IaC pipelines, as well as being aware of some of the runtime costs that we have to be able to manage and govern from a right sizing or a waste management capability as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you brought up a good point. It's about a balance of left and right. A lot of times people get too focused on left or too focused on right side. It certainly has to be a balance in that sense. So Mandy, in your view, what really makes policy and governance scalable than a one-time thing?
This is going to surprise everyone, but automation. So in our case, again, management buy-in wasn't really an issue, but automation is really how we would scale governance policy, especially IaC. So deploying resources all the same way, right? You have either Terraform or an orchestrator that's really centralizing how things are being deployed so that you don't have engineers that are deploying things outside of the best practice that your company has decided on. So also guardrails and guidelines and automated upgrades there's also a tie in there with security. So you don't have that engineer that accidentally leaves a bucket with public access. If you didn't have a policy that blocked that, that would be something to look out for security. And I saw there's a question about security too. So the automation helps in that sense too, with scalability and security. So it saves time. It makes sure it's done the right way each time. And then for updates, for when things change, for adding new things, you just do it in the code, and it's scaled out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Bindu, do you want to add something? You're on mute.
I
have to say-
completely agree around automation. Automation is the key. Any repetitive processes that can make at least the FinOps practitioner job easier is the best way to go. Buying in from your management, making sure the right stakeholders are informed at the right time. They all so these things are beyond guardrails and controls. By the way, these are the best practices. This is part of that culture that a practitioner should adopt and bring the whole kind of an education for an organization, that it's not always about the cost, it's the value, it's the culture, the cost conscious culture that we want to develop. And these are the ways, the automation, the education, that why are we doing it and for whom are we doing it. It's not like I would say it's not, policies are not one size fits all. There could be some regulatory environment. I gave example of log retention and such, but for regulatory reasons, there could be a requirement that you have to do it. So those are edge cases. So it is never one size fits all. But how do we make sure, for a practitioner point of view, how do we make sure everyone is communicated and they have visibility into these policies? It is not just happening in silos. So that is, I think I would like to add.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you also mentioned CCOE as well, and the role of CCOE, Cloud Center of Excellence. And I was wondering how many of the attendees have a formal Cloud Center of Excellence that also drives some of the policy and governance too. Do mention it in the chat if you get a chance. And Kapil?
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of scaling out, policy and governance, like a lot of it's about creating the right channels, like potentially in a centralized way that allows for decentralization over time. And what do I mean by that? Like making sure that you've got a clear communication channel for centralized policy rollout that can go through your app teams and your line of businesses, but also enabling the federation of authoring such that those lines of business and apps can create their own policies and also can do their rollouts with communications back to their individual app teams. Like, because that allows them to go faster, like make sure that you have all of your top of the house policies, but enables all of the apps, teams, and lines of businesses to go faster where they feel it's more appropriate. My common example is, tag policy. Like, no two organizations have the same tag policy, but even within an organization, you may have differentiation requirements. And, in some cases, an organization may want to go faster with regards to cost savings and do off hours within a particular application team or a particular line of businesses compute, or they may want to go like more restrictive on particular GPU types. So enabling the top of the house things that allow for realizing of savings and the process for them to be communicated out, and then enabling the app teams and business teams to be able to roll out their own on top of those. And then being able to make sure that you're enabling the communications directly to where developers live, being able to communicate back into Jira or into GitHub issues, into Slack, into Teams. So as these policies are finding things, making, before you do modification to those resources, make sure that the app teams are aware of the issue, giving them a chance to file for to go through automated exception management, and just keeping in mind the first rule of automation is do no harm.
Great. And I guess another question is, we'll make it really quick, is one example of a policy that has delivered the most value for your current organization or your organization in the past as well. We'll start with you, Bindu.
Sure. I would say I'll give you an example of GP2 to GP3. Objective is to reduce the storage cost by moving to GP3. We all know by this time they are 15% cheaper than the GP2 volume. So what can we do? The enforcement rules might look like that. Okay, we tagged all the GP2 volumes, and then if there is if they need a GP2 volume, then as an approval process, as I talked about in the beginning, then have the justification so that when the automation kicks in, they know what to ignore and then convert rest of them into the GP3. We could also set up an audit function, taking an AWS as an example through Lambda, to find how many are non-compliant GP2 volumes are found, and then publish those reports to stakeholder, to owners, just to give them the visibility. And then setting up some even remediation actions, right? Once notified, maybe after 7 days, these will be deleted. So again, what it brings is that it turns the one-time optimization efforts into a lasting result. And that is all the governance is about.
I love the tagline, one-time effort into lasting efforts. Everybody wants to work less.
Effectively, not work less in that working hours sense, but make the lasting impact and work effectively, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you. Mandy?
Sure. So we saw some great examples of policies earlier, but mine would be the EBS volumes that are old and unused for 30 days. So the way that we were deploying our instances, the EBS volumes weren't deleted on termination of an instance. So we had quite a bit of volumes that were orphaned and stacking up some cost. So that was our biggest saver policy that we implemented.
Great. Kapil?
Yeah, I think probably off hours is one of my favorites because it just has so much opportunity for capturing significant savings. And you can do that not just on your compute, but also on databases, depending on the cloud provider environment, where you're just turning things off. And you have to do that inclusive of, multinational, multi-time zone development teams. So being aware of being able to put tag schedules on things, being able to turn things on when people want to work late on a particular period. But overall, you're able to realize potentially 7% compute on some of these things. You can do that either on an opt-in basis or opt-out basis. As an interesting corollary to those, the other thing between doing off hours is potentially doing things like ephemeral resources where they're automatically terminated after a certain time period, where you're just you can have in the sandbox, you can have any resource you want, but it's going to be terminated after 2 weeks. So those types of things can help sort of keep waste down and realize savings opportunities around things that when they're not being used.
Great. I know there were a lot of questions around off hours too. Kapil is definitely an expert in off hours. So if you have any questions, please put them in for the panel. Victor, anybody has a question? We have a great time to put it in the panel, in the chat or in the Q&A. But before I take audience questions, I just wanted to give everybody 30 more seconds to give one last advice. Bindu, starting with you, what you would give to somebody who's doing policy and governance of FinOps related, especially usage optimization.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you, Umair, for this opportunity to be part of this panel. I would say tagline as FinOps governance is not about controlling spend, but creating the cost-conscious culture. It's about empowering team with right guardrails, visibility, and accountability so they can make the smart decisions.
Great, Mandy.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Amer. I've learned so much from just the people on this panel and the rest of this day, so thanks. The quote that we saw earlier was quite good, with every policy as a lever, and with automation, you don't just cut the cost, but reshape how your org builds and grows sustainability. That was a really good quote. I won't try to make up my own.
Yeah, that'll be Victor Lindbergh, so for sure. But cool. Kapil?
I also don't know that I have anything to add. I very much echo what Bindu was saying, and this is very much, the FinOps practice is very much about, educating and creating culture changes in terms of how people think about the problem and how, like, making it one of their, not just performance and scalability, but making, cost efficiency part of that culture, and then educating them when they're doing something wrong.
Great. And with that, thank you all. Unless there are any questions, Victor, do you have any questions?
I'm going to leave the floor to the questions in the chat first, and then I can ask them if I have time, because we have a very long one, and then we have an additional one. So what I'm going to do is split the first one in several questions, and then I'm going to also introduce the others. So Kunwar made a long question, so I'm going to split this one. So let's start. So from a FinOps governance perspective, how we can ensure that our financial modeling and capacity information drive effective automation, while also addressing security demands that may impact implementation timeline. So how do you balance the finance, the capacity information, also security, to make it on time? It's a difficult answer, but I don't know who wants to go first.
I can throw a perspective on this, and hoping, Kanwar, I'm understanding your question correctly. How I would approach it is, when you talk about financial modeling, you are thinking about, you have taken into consideration your outlook for, let's say, for the rest of the year, based on your calendar year of an organization, and also you have a roadmap of your product, and based on those two input parameters, you have laid out your capacity, that based on this feature coming up, we will need these kind of, let's take a compute instances, and we have modeled this. Right. And again, security demands I'll keep out of it, because that will come later as part of the control. But how I will approach it with the practitioner mindset is taking that model and using the top-down approach. We talked about Cloud Center of Excellence. That's where my starting point would be, that this is the new demand coming up. This is how we are planning the capacity, and it all aligns with our modeling, right? The finance modeling. And we know, as part of Cloud Center of Excellence, we have a stakeholder from all the department, right? The finance department, the product department, engineering department, right? But you bring a good point of getting the security department stakeholder also. So thanks for that nugget. So we start from there. So I would take a top-down approach, that this is coming. And if you're talking about the capacity, it also brings up that to meet this capacity, finance needs to know that there could be a budget, addition that we need to put in place. And then they can allocate the budget correctly based on, maybe it's going to engineering and even to the operations, right? Because the workload will go into the production. So that's how I will approach it. From the FinOps governance perspective, I will not think about the automation at this time, because this is in a very early stage. Set up remember I talked about the structure, the accountability, and the visibility part. So that I would take those factors at this time. And when it matures, then you bring in more of think about automation there. I hope this helps.
No, great. Anything anybody else wants to add?
I was thinking with security, you can bake in security demands into your infrastructure as code and into the FinOps policies that you implement. I know Stacklet has some out-of-the-box security policies too.
Cool. And I think Nikki would cover some of that concept too, because he comes from a security background in the next section. But I think with that, I think we're on time. Thank you so much, the panelists, for joining us today and your time. I think definitely the audience as well, lots of questions, lots of Q&A. Keep sharing your thoughts. What do you think about the content? Up next, we have Nikki